The dark side of the unconscious, Freud's most disturbing idea. There is a version of you that you have never met. It does not sleep when you sleep. It does not rest when you rest. It watches quietly from somewhere beneath the floor of your own mind, shaping the words you choose, the people you love, the mistakes you keep making without ever understanding why. You would like to believe that you know yourself, that the person making decisions, falling in love, losing tempers, chasing goals, is fully aware of his own reasons. But what if that belief is the most convincing illusion the human mind has ever produced? What if the self you experience every day is only the visible tip of something far larger and far stranger hiding beneath the surface? This is the question that haunted a man in Vienna more than a century ago, and it is a question that, once asked, is very difficult to unask. Before the 20th century, most people in the Western world held a comforting assumption. They believed that human beings were essentially rational creatures, that a person's conscious mind, the part that thinks, reasons, and decides, was the true center of who they were. If you wanted to understand why someone did something, you simply asked them, and they told you. Motives were visible. Behavior made sense. The mind was a well-lit room. Sigmund Freud, a Viennese neurologist working at the end of the 19th century, proposed something far darker. He suggested that the conscious mind, the part we experience as ourselves, is not the whole house. It is a single room, brightly lit, while the rest of the structure stretches downward into darkness, filled with corridors we never enter, and doors we do not know exist. Freud did not simply suggest that we sometimes act without full understanding. He suggested something more unsettling, that a significant portion of our thoughts, memories, desires, and fears operates entirely outside our awareness, and yet continues to steer the course of our lives. He called this hidden territory the unconscious. And once Freud introduced the idea, psychology could never return to its old, comfortable assumptions. So what exactly did Freud mean by the unconscious? Picture the mind as an iceberg floating in dark water. Above the surface, small and exposed, is conscious awareness. This is the part of you that reads these words right now, that makes deliberate choices, that feels certain it understands its own reasoning. But beneath the waterline, invisible and enormous, lies everything else. Old memories you no longer consciously recall, desires you have never given yourself permission to feel, fears you learned so early in life that you no longer remember learning them at all. According to Freud, this hidden mass beneath the surface does not simply sit there, dormant. It moves, it pushes, it influences the choices made by the small, visible portion above the water, often without leaving any trace of its involvement. You may consciously believe you want closeness, connection, stability, and yet, again and again, you find yourself drawn toward people who cannot give you those things. You may consciously believe you want success, and yet, when the moment arrives to take the final step, something inside you hesitates, delays, sabotages. You tell yourself a story about who you are and what you want. Meanwhile, according to Freud, something underneath may be writing a very different story, one you are living out without ever reading it. Consider the person who insists, calmly and repeatedly, that they do not care what others think of them, and yet becomes quietly devastated whenever they are overlooked or excluded. Consider the person who swears they are finished with a painful chapter of their past, and yet feels their chest tighten at the smallest reminder of it. Consider the man who explodes in anger over a minor comment from a coworker, an anger far too large for the situation, an anger that seems to belong to some older wound rather than the moment itself. Freud would ask a different question than most of us are used to asking. Not, what happened to make this person react this way, but what is this reaction protecting them from knowing about themselves? It is important to say clearly that these are Freud's theories, his interpretations of the mind, formed at a particular moment in history. They are not universally accepted as proven scientific fact, and many of his specific claims remain debated, even rejected, by modern psychology. But the underlying question he raised, whether we are fully aware of our own motives, remains one of the most important questions ever asked about human nature. And it is here that the story turns from merely fascinating to something more disturbing. Freud believed that living inside a society requires each of us to suppress a great deal of what we naturally feel: raw anger, raw desire, aggression, jealousy, selfishness, impulses that, if acted upon freely, would make ordinary life among other human beings impossible. Civilization, Freud argued, survives by asking its members to bury certain instincts rather than express them. We learn, from childhood onward, which feelings are acceptable to show and which must be hidden, first from others and eventually from ourselves. This is the disturbing part. Freud did not believe that once we bury an impulse, it disappears. He believed it goes on existing quietly in the unconscious, still exerting pressure, still searching for a way out. We are taught to feel shame about our anger, so we swallow it until it resurfaces as bitterness toward people who did nothing to deserve it. We are taught that certain desires are unacceptable, so we deny having them until they return in dreams, in compulsions, in the strange intensity of feelings we cannot explain. Freud proposed that human beings live inside a constant, largely invisible negotiation between what we want and what we believe we are permitted to want, between the raw material of instinct and the demands of a world that requires us to behave. Most of us never notice this negotiation taking place. We only see its results: the unexplained mood, the disproportionate reaction, the relationship pattern we cannot break no matter how many times we promise ourselves it will be different this time. Freud gave this process of burying unacceptable thoughts a name: repression. Repression, in Freud's model, is the mind's way of protecting itself. When a thought, a memory, or a desire becomes too painful, too shameful, or too dangerous to hold in conscious awareness, the mind pushes it downward out of sight. For a while, this seems to work. The thought is no longer visible. The wound no longer aches, at least not in any way we can name. But Freud made a claim that still unsettles people today. He believed that what is pushed out of consciousness does not necessarily cease to exist. It may simply find another way to speak. A repressed memory may return disguised as an unexplained fear. A buried resentment may return disguised as illness or irritability, or a sudden coldness towards someone we love. The original feeling has changed its clothing, but it has not left the house. This does not mean, and Freud himself would not have claimed, that every difficulty in life traces back to some hidden repressed trauma. Life is complicated, and not every problem has a secret unconscious cause. But Freud's warning remains worth considering. Sometimes the thing we refuse to look at directly finds a way to make itself known indirectly, through the body, through behavior, through the patterns we repeat, without understanding why. There is a particular kind of moment that fascinated Freud more than almost any other: the moment when the mouth says something the conscious mind never intended to say. We call it, even today, a Freudian slip. Freud believed that these small verbal accidents, calling someone by the wrong name, saying the opposite of what we meant, forgetting a word at exactly the wrong time, were not always random. He believed that in certain cases, these slips revealed a thought that the unconscious mind had been holding back, a thought that briefly escaped through a crack in our careful self-control. A man meets his partner's family for the first time and, without meaning to, calls his partner by an ex's name. A person introducing a colleague they secretly resent stumbles and, instead of praising their work, says something quietly critical before correcting themselves. In Freud's view, the tongue occasionally tells the truth the mind has been working hard to conceal. Modern psychology does not accept every one of these interpretations. Many slips of the tongue are now understood simply as errors of memory or attention, nothing more. But the cultural fascination with the Freudian slip has never disappeared, because it raises a question that still feels uncomfortably true. Can our mistakes sometimes reveal more about us than our carefully chosen words? If the unconscious speaks through slips during waking life, Freud believed it spoke even more freely during sleep. Dreams, in Freud's view, were not meaningless static produced by a resting brain. They were, he argued, a kind of disguised message from the unconscious, a way for buried wishes and unresolved fears to expressed themselves while the mind's usual defenses were lowered. Freud believed dreams often speak in symbols rather than plain language, precisely because the true content would be too disturbing, too unacceptable to appear directly. A dream about being chased might not be about the pursuer at all, but about something the dreamer is, trying to outrun in waking life, a decision, a truth, a feeling. A dream about falling might represent a fear of losing control, of failing, of the ground disappearing beneath some part of life that once felt stable. A dream about being trapped in a small room might reflect a waking sense of being trapped in a relationship, a job, or an identity that no longer fits. Freud called dream interpretation an uncertain art, not an exact science. And modern researchers largely study dreams through very different frameworks today. But the underlying question Freud raised about dreams remains difficult to dismiss entirely. Why does the sleeping mind produce such vivid, emotionally charged stories at all, if not to process something the waking mind has left unresolved? To explain how this hidden inner conflict operates, Freud offered one of his most famous models of the human psyche, a structure with three parts, locked in constant negotiation. The first is the ID, ancient, primitive, and entirely unconcerned with consequences. The ID wants what it wants, immediately, and it does not care about morality, practicality, or the feelings of others. The second is the superego, the internalized voice of parents, society, religion, and conscience. The superego tells us what we should want, what is acceptable, what is forbidden, and it can be harsh, even cruel, in its judgments. Between these two forces stands the ego, the part of the mind tasked with living in the real world. The ego must satisfy the ID's demands, answer to the superego's judgments, and somehow still function within the practical limits of everyday life. Picture a man standing in a shop, staring at something he desperately wants but cannot afford. The ID says, simply take it. The superego responds immediately with something closer to condemnation. You are not the kind of person who steals. The ego stands in the middle, absorbing both pressures, searching for a way forward that will not destroy him, whether that means walking away, saving money, or negotiating some compromise between desire and restraint. Freud believed this three-way tension exists inside every one of us, almost every day, mostly unnoticed. We do not consciously experience the ID, the ego, and the superego arguing with one another. We simply experience the result, a decision, a feeling of guilt, a sudden craving, an unexplainable resistance to doing the very thing we claim we want to do. Which brings us to the most disturbing question this entire idea forces us to confront. If so much of our behavior is shaped by forces we cannot see or fully understand, how much control do we actually have over ourselves? Do we truly choose our own desires, or do we simply discover them, already formed, arriving from somewhere we cannot examine? Why do so many of us repeat patterns we consciously wish to escape? Why does the person who swears they will never again fall for the same kind of relationship find themselves, months later, standing in the exact same place, wondering how they arrived there again? Why do we sometimes know, with complete clarity, what is good for us, and choose the opposite anyway? How much of what we call our personality was actually decided by us, and how much was shaped by experiences from childhood we can barely remember, imprinted before we had the language to understand what was happening to us? Freud does not offer comfortable answers to these questions. Perhaps because there are none. Perhaps the honest answer is that we know ourselves far less completely than we assume, that the story we tell about our own motives is, at best, a partial account, narrated by a narrator who does not have access to the whole archive. It would be inaccurate to present Freud's ideas as settled science. Much of his specific theoretical framework, the exact mechanics of the ID, the ego, and the superego, his particular methods of dream interpretation, has been challenged, revised, or rejected by later generations of psychologists and researchers. Contemporary psychology draws on cognitive science, neuroscience, and decades of empirical research that did not exist in Freud's time, and it does not accept every claim he made. And yet his central insight endures, because it survived the collapse of many of his specific theories. The idea that human beings are influenced by mental processes outside conscious awareness is now widely accepted in one form or another across modern psychology, even among those who reject the details of Freud's model. We now speak of implicit bias, automatic thought patterns, subconscious associations, all descendants, however distant, of the territory Freud was the first to map. The specific map Freud drew may have been imperfect, but the discovery that there was a hidden territory to map at all, that may be his most lasting contribution, because underneath every theory, every disagreement, every revision, one question remains exactly as unsettling now as it was when Freud first asked it. How well do we really know ourselves? Perhaps the most disturbing thing about the unconscious is not that hidden parts of ourselves exist. Perhaps it is the possibility that those hidden parts have been quietly present all along, in the relationships we chose without knowing why, in the arguments that erupted from somewhere deeper than the moment that triggered them, in the goals we longed for, and, at the final step, found some hidden reason to avoid, in the dreams we woke from at 3 a.m, shaken by something we could not name. We move through our lives believing we are the author of our own story, and perhaps, in part, we are. But Freud leaves us with the possibility that another hand has also been writing somewhere beneath the surface, in ink we were never given the chance to read. If there is one thing worth carrying with you after hearing this, it may be a quieter kind of attention. The next time you feel a reaction that seems too large for its cause, the next time you catch yourself repeating a pattern you swore you had left behind, the next time a dream leaves you unsettled long after waking, perhaps that is the unconscious doing what Freud believed it has always done, speaking in its own disguised language about something the rest of you has not yet been ready to hear. If this exploration of Freud's darkest and most fascinating idea gave you something to think about, consider staying a while longer. This channel, Aion Sophia, exists to walk through exactly these kinds of questions, the timeless, uncomfortable, deeply human ideas found at the crossing point of psychology and philosophy. If you found value here, a like helps this work reach others who are asking the same questions you are. Subscribing with notifications turned on means you will not miss what comes next. And before you go, I want to ask you something directly. Are we truly in control of our own minds? Or are there parts of ourselves we will never completely understand, no matter how closely we look? Leave your answer in the comments. I would like to know what you think, because in the end, perhaps that is the only honest place to leave this. Not with an answer, but with the question itself, following you quietly, the way the unconscious always has.